The midnight confession, the village of Demu, slept under the silver glow of the full moon. Crickets sang their nightly songs, and the cool breeze rustled the leaves of the ancient baobab tree standing tall at the village center. But while most slept, an old woman sat alone on a wooden stool outside her hut, wrapped in a faded kitenge, her hands trembling. Mama Nandi, 60 years old, had carried many burdens in her lifetime, but none as heavy as the one in her heart tonight. Her once strong body, adorned with layers of beaded necklaces, now seemed frail beneath the weight of her secret. The hut behind her, dimly lit by an oil lamp, held the truth she dared not speak. A distant sound made her stiffen. Footsteps. She turned sharply, her heartbeat quickening. The shadows shifted, and a tall figure emerged. Kwame, 35 years old, her son-in-law, walked toward her with careful steps. He was dressed in a loose tunic, his muscular arms tense as he approached. His eyes, usually warm and full of laughter, held fear tonight. They stood in silence, the truth between them louder than words. The village had no idea. Not yet. But secrets had a way of seeping through the cracks of the night, just like the whispers already beginning to spread among those who sensed something was amiss. Mama Nandi knew she had to make a decision soon. But could she bear the shame? And more importantly, could she survive it? Amina, 30 years old, sat on a woven mat inside her hut, threading colorful beads into her necklace. Her Ankara dress clung to her slender frame, its bright red and gold patterns glowing under the flickering light of the oil lamp. Her hands moved mechanically, but her mind wandered. For weeks now, she had noticed a change in her mother. Mama Nandi had always been a woman of discipline, rising before dawn to sweep the compound and prepare breakfast. But lately she had become withdrawn. Her movements were slower, her appetite smaller. She spent long hours alone, lost in thought. And then there was Kwame. Her husband, usually open and cheerful, had grown distant. He left their hut late at night, returning only before sunrise. When she questioned him, he brushed it off, claiming he needed to clear his head. But why did he smell of the night air and sweat, as if he had been running? Tonight, Amina had decided to stay awake. She sat, listening, waiting, and then she heard it, the soft creak of the wooden door. Slowly she rose and peered through a small gap in the hut's wall. Her heart clenched as she saw Kwame moving toward Mama Nandi's hut. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. Mama Nandi had always prided herself on her strength. At 60, she was still as capable as any woman half her age. She carried heavy water pots from the river, tended to her small farm, and counseled young women on marriage and family. But now her body was betraying her. She stood before the small mirror in her hut, her trembling hands resting on her belly. Beneath the folds of her kitenge, something was changing. It was subtle at first, the slight swelling, the unexpected nausea in the mornings, the deep fatigue. But now it was undeniable. She closed her eyes, whispering a silent prayer. How had she allowed this to happen? She had lived her life with wisdom, guiding others through their troubles. And now she stood at the center of a storm she could not escape. Kwame, 35, had visited her again last night. He stood in the doorway, hesitant, guilt written all over his face. "We must tell Amina," he had said. But how could they? How could they face her and the entire village with such a sin? Amina was not a fool. She would notice soon, and when she did, there would be no turning back. Mama Nandi clutched her stomach and shivered. The weight of this secret was growing inside her, both in her heart and in her womb. He midnight meeting Kwame, 35, paced beneath the ancient baobab tree, his loose tunic clinging to his damp skin. His heart pounded as he waited. The moon above him was bright, casting eerie shadows across the dusty ground. Tonight he had to face the truth. Mama Nandi, 60, arrived moments later, her kaiteng wrapped tightly around her frail frame. She moved slowly, her sandals kicking up dust with each step. She stopped in front of him, her face unreadable. "We cannot hide this forever," Kwame whispered, rubbing his temples. "Amina will know soon." Mama Nandi sighed deeply. "I know," she said, her voice weary. "But what do we do? The village will never forgive us. The ancestors... The ancestors will curse us if we keep this secret," Kwame interrupted. "We must confess before someone else finds out." Mama Nandai looked away, her eyes glistening. She had lived through war, famine, and loss. But this was the one thing she never imagined facing. A rustling sound made them both freeze. Someone was nearby. Had they been overheard? Kwame's breath hitched. If the village found out before they spoke, they would be doomed. The elders would exile them. Amina would never forgive them. Mama Nandi swallowed hard. "Then we must confess. Before it's too late." Kwame nodded, but deep inside he feared. Was it already too late? The shattered home. Amina, 30, sat outside her hut, her Ankara dress billowing in the evening breeze. She had not slept the night before. The whispers of the village women at the market had been unsettling. They spoke in hushed tones, their eyes flickering toward her when they thought she wasn't looking. Her mother, Mama Nandi, 60, had been avoiding her gaze, and Kwame, 35, had been restless. The unease in her chest grew heavier. When she returned home, she found Kwame sitting on a stool, his head buried in his hands. "Tell me the truth," she demanded, her voice steady but firm. "What is happening?" Kwame lifted his head, his eyes filled with guilt. "Amina." He started, but his voice cracked. At that moment, Mama Nandi stepped into the hut, her faded kaitenje wrapped tightly around her thin frame. The look in her mother's eyes made Amina's stomach drop. A heavy silence settled between them before Mama Nandi spoke. "My child, there is something you must know." Amina's heart pounded. She felt the weight of the ancestors pressing down on her, as if the spirits of their forefathers were watching. And then the words left Mama Nandi's lips, a confession that shattered the world Amina knew. Her mother was pregnant, and the father was her own husband. Amina staggered back, the room spinning. A scream built in her throat, but no sound came. Everything she had ever believed in had just crumbled before her eyes. The village murmurs. By sunrise, the secret had already slithered through the village like a venomous snake. The women whispered behind their hands, their voices filled with disbelief. The men shook their heads, muttering about curses and taboos. Mama Nandi, 60, had always been a respected elder. She had guided young brides, advised troubled marriages, and settled family disputes. But now she had become the center of the greatest scandal the village had ever seen. Kwame, 35, was no longer just a hard-working farmer. He was a man who had betrayed his wife in the worst way. The village elders sat beneath the great baobab tree, their faces dark with concern. Elder Jengo, 70, dressed in a brown Agbada robe, sighed deeply. "The ancestors are watching," he said gravely. "This is not a small matter." Amina, 30, had locked herself inside her hut, refusing to eat, refusing to speak. Her tears had long since dried, but the storm inside her heart raged on. Outside, the gossipers continued. "How could a woman her age even carry a child?" One woman scoffed, adjusting her colorful head wrap. "It is a curse," another whispered. "The spirits are angry." Mama Nandi sat outside her hut, feeling the weight of their stares. She had always taught others to do right, yet she had failed herself. And now the entire village waited for what would happen next. The curse of the ancestors' night had fallen, but the village remained awake. The fire in the center of the square burned brightly, casting flickering shadows on the watching faces. The priestess, an elderly woman dressed in white, cowrie-adorned robes, stepped forward. "The ancestors are angry," she announced, her voice carrying through the silence. "A child born of such betrayal will bring either great misfortune or great power. We must decide. Do we allow this child to be born?" Mama Nandi, 60, placed a protective hand over her swollen belly. "He is innocent," she whispered. "Do not punish the child for my sins." Kwame, 35, felt his stomach twist. Had they truly cursed their own bloodline? Amina, 30, turned her tear-stained face toward the priestess. "What do the spirits demand?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The priestess closed her eyes, listening to the wind, to the whispers of those beyond. When she opened them, her gaze was firm. "The child must be named by the ancestors," she said, "and should any misfortune befall the village, it will be the mother and father who will pay the price." A hush fell over the crowd. Mama Nandi and Kwame's fate was sealed. They had defied the laws of the living. Now they belonged to the mercy of the dead. The lesson of forgiveness. Amina's journey out of Ndemu was not just a physical one. It was a journey of the heart. As the days passed, she found herself slowly healing, the weight of her family's betrayal becoming lighter with each step. She traveled to a neighboring village where she was welcomed by kind strangers who had never heard of her past. They taught her to live with integrity, to forgive when forgiveness seemed impossible, and to understand that the heart could only truly heal through love and understanding. In time, Amina returned to Ndemu, not as a woman running from her pain, but as one who had learned the hardest lesson of all. She sought out her mother, Mama Nandi, 60, who was tending to the small garden outside her hut. Their eyes met, and without words, Amina embraced her. The child that Mama Nandi carried had been born, and with his arrival, the village's judgment had softened. But more than that, Amina had learned that while betrayal could wound deeply, it was the power of forgiveness that would free her from the chains of bitterness. "You have forgiven me, my daughter?" Mama Nandi asked quietly, her voice trembling with vulnerability. Amina smiled, tears in her eyes. "I have, Mother. We are all flawed. It is the human condition, but it is love that heals even the deepest scars." And so Amina returned to her roots, no longer defined by her family's mistakes, but by the strength and wisdom she had gained. The lesson was clear. Forgiveness is not just for those who have wronged us. It is for our own peace, for our own growth. Without it, we carry chains that never let us move forward.